Everyone thinks they know Michael J. Fox's story. They don't. At 64, he's finally said something in public that has nothing to do with Parkinson's and everything to do with a truth he's been sitting on since long before most fans even knew he was sick. Here's what most people get wrong. They assume the moment that broke Michael J. Fox was the diagnosis itself. It wasn't. The thing that actually broke him happened years into hiding it, quietly backstage with nobody watching. And for a long time, he didn't tell a single soul. Not his co-stars. Not the network. Not for a while, even the people who loved him most. He spent nearly a decade building one of the most beloved careers in Hollywood while hiding something that should have ended it overnight. And the way the truth finally came out wasn't through a press conference or a rehearsed statement. It came out almost against his will, and what happened next surprised absolutely everyone, including him. So what was he actually hiding? What made him wait 7 years to say it out loud? And what is the truth he's only now, at 64, finally willing to say without flinching? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why the real Michael J. Fox story was never really about time travel at all. Before any of it, before the fame, before the secret, before the disease that would define half his life, there was just a small, restless kid who never stayed in one place long enough to unpack. Michael Andrew Fox was born June 9, 1961, in Edmonton, Alberta, into a military family that moved on command. His father, William Fox, was a career soldier in the Canadian Forces. Every few years brought a new base, a new school, a new set of kids to win over from scratch. His mother, Phyllis, held it together. Somehow, every time. By the time the family settled in Burnaby, British Columbia, Michael was the fourth of 5 kids, small for his age, quick with a joke, and, according to the people who taught him, impossible to ignore even when he was trying to disappear into the back row. That size would follow him. It would cost him roles later. It would also, strangely, become one of the biggest advantages of his entire career. But he wouldn't find that out for years. At home, with 4 siblings competing for the same attention, Michael learned early that being funny got him noticed in a way being quiet never did. He'd perform little bits at the dinner table just to make his brothers and sisters laugh, testing timing on an audience that had absolutely no obligation to be kind about it. It was, in hindsight, the first stage he ever worked. What changed everything was a drama teacher who noticed the restless kid nobody could keep still and pushed him toward a stage instead of detention. At 15, Michael landed his first paid acting job, a small part on a Canadian sitcom called Leo and Me. It paid almost nothing. It also planted something in him that never let go. By 18, that something had turned into a decision his parents didn't fully understand, and one his father in particular thought was a mistake. He wanted to drop out, leave Canada, try Los Angeles. No formal training, no connections, no backup plan. His father thought it was reckless, his mother worried and said less than she felt. But in the end, William Fox drove his son south anyway, then turned around and drove home without him. What he didn't know, on that long, quiet drive back to Canada, was that he'd just delivered one of the most recognizable faces of the next decade straight into the one city built to use people up and spit them back out. Because Los Angeles wasn't waiting with open arms. It almost never is. For the first few years, it looked like his father might have been right. Los Angeles, in the late 1970s, was flooded with teenagers who looked like they belonged on a poster. Michael, barely 18, boyish and unmistakably Canadian, wasn't one of them. Work was thin, money was thinner. He scraped by on guest spots and forgettable credits. Trapper John, MD, Palmerstown, USA. The kind of resume that builds patience and nothing else. Casting directors weren't cruel about it. They were worse. They were indifferent. He was short. He looked, in his own words later, more like somebody's kid brother than a movie star. And in an industry obsessed with one very specific kind of face, his simply wasn't it. For a while, the auditions blurred together into the same quiet rejection on repeat. He'd walk in, read a few lines, watch the casting director's face give nothing away, and walk back out having no idea whether he'd get a call back or never hear from them again. Most of the time, it was the second one. He kept going anyway because the alternative was calling his father and admitting the drive south had been a mistake, and that was a phone call he wasn't willing to make. Then, in 1982, everything almost didn't happen. Producer Gary David Goldberg was casting a new NBC sitcom about ex-hippie parents raising a conservative, ambition-obsessed teenage son. He wanted Michael for the lead. The network wasn't sold. By multiple accounts, at least one executive doubted that an actor who looked the way Michael did could ever become the kind of star whose face ends up on a kid's lunchbox. Goldberg fought for him anyway. Family Ties went forward, and it almost buried him before it made him, because another actor was already registered with the Screen Actors Guild under the name Michael Fox. Rather than reinvent himself completely, he added a middle initial as a quiet tribute to a favorite character actor, Michael J. Pollard. Michael J. Fox was born, professionally, at least. The show premiered that fall to modest ratings and reviews that barely mentioned him. Then something strange happened. Audiences who were supposed to root against Alex P. Keaton's politics couldn't stop rooting for the actor playing him instead. What audiences didn't see behind that easy comic rhythm was how deliberately he'd built it. Michael has said he studied the timing of a scene the way a musician studies sheet music, counting beats, testing exactly where a pause would land harder than a line. Live audience nights on Family Ties became the most useful film school he never asked for, except nobody was calling it that yet. Within 2 seasons, Family Ties was one of the highest-rated shows in America, and the kid once dismissed as too small, too plain, too forgettable, had become the entire reason people tuned in. But television wasn't going to be what made him a household name across the entire planet. That was about to come from a movie role he almost didn't get to keep, in a production that had already started filming with a completely different actor in the lead. Here's the part almost nobody remembers correctly. Michael J. Fiss. Fox was never supposed to play Marty McFly. Director Robert Zemeckis and producer Steven Spielberg had already cast another actor, Eric Stoltz, and started shooting Back to the Future months before Michael ever set foot on set. But after watching the early footage, they made a brutal call. Stoltz was out. The film, they decided, needed more comedic, more visibly youthful energy in the lead role. Michael had reportedly been their first choice all along. He just wasn't available. He was already locked into Family Ties. So Goldberg agreed to something almost unheard of, rearranging an entire hit sitcom shooting schedule around one actor's second job. What followed nearly destroyed him. For months, Michael filmed Family Ties by day and Back to the Future by night, sometimes surviving on a handful of hours of sleep before doing it all again. He's since described it less like juggling 2 jobs and more like living 2 entire lives at once, powered by nothing but adrenaline and the stubborn belief it would be worth it. It was. When Back to the Future opened in July 1985, it became the highest-grossing film of the year. Overnight, Michael went from sitcom star to one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. 2 sequels followed in 1989 and 1990. The trilogy became untouchable, and the hits kept coming. Teen Wolf, released the same year as Back to the Future, turned him into a basketball-playing werewolf and gave him another instantly quotable pop culture image. The Secret of My Success made him a corporate comedy leading man. For a stretch, it felt like nothing he touched could miss. Then, on purpose, he pushed against his own image, taking darker, riskier roles in Bright Lights, Big City, and Casualties of War, determined to prove he was more than a grin and good timing. It didn't fully land. Reviews were mixed, and some longtime fans wanted the boyish charm back, not a war drama. For a moment, it looked like the gamble might cost him the goodwill he'd spent years building, but the attempt mattered anyway. It told the industry, and told Michael himself, that Alex P. Keaton and Marty McFly weren't the ceiling of what he could do. Doc Hollywood in 1991 let him slow all the way down, play someone closer to his own age, and prove the appeal was never just about being frozen at 17 forever. Through it all, Family Ties kept running, eventually earning him 3 Emmys for a role network executives once didn't want to gamble on at all. By the mid-1990s, he found a new challenge in Spin City, playing fast-talking Deputy Mayor Mike Flaherty. Another hit, another Golden Globe. From the outside, it was the exact career every young actor dreams about, and almost none of them actually get. But here's the part the cameras never caught. While the entire country was laughing at how effortlessly Mike Flaherty recovered from every political disaster, the actor playing him was privately fighting to keep his own body from betraying him, take after take, year after year, in near total secrecy. Before the secret that would define the second half of his life, Michael found something else entirely, the relationship that would anchor all of it. He found her fittingly on the set of Family Ties. Actress Tracy Pollan joined the show in 1985 to play Alex Keaton's girlfriend. Michael has said his first instinct around her wasn't romantic at all. She was serious, guarded, and completely unimpressed that he happened to be one of the most famous young men in the country. That indifference, he later admitted, was exactly what hooked him. They married quietly in Vermont in July 1988, far from the Hollywood machine that had made them both recognizable. Their son Sam arrived the following year. Twin daughters, Aquina and Skylar, came in 1995. A fourth child, Esme, completed the family in 2001. They made a deliberate choice most young Hollywood couples never manage, keeping the marriage almost entirely out of the tabloid machine that had built both of their careers. No staged photo spreads, no joint magazine covers selling their happiness to the highest bidder. Just a private life they guarded, like something they knew, even then, they might need to lean on someday. On paper, Michael had built the life every young star chases and almost none of them find. A hit franchise behind him, a hit show in front of him, a marriage to a woman who knew him before any of the fame and stayed anyway. But here's what almost no one outside that small circle knew. In 1991, while filming Doc Hollywood, Michael noticed something small, a persistent twitch in the little finger of his left hand. He was 29. He assumed it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. A doctor gave him a diagnosis he was not remotely prepared to hear at an age when most people aren't thinking about their bodies failing them at all. Early onset Parkinson's disease, a progressive neurological disorder, no cure. Typically found in patients decades older than he was. He was told in that first conversation that he had roughly 10 years of a normal, fully functioning career left before the disease would make acting impossible. He has since said that he spent the drive home from that appointment doing the math in his head over and over, trying to figure out how many more roles, how many more good years, 10 years actually meant. He didn't have an answer. Nobody does with a disease like this. That uncertainty, more than the tremor itself, was the part he found hardest to sit with. He didn't tell the public. For a long time, he barely told anyone at all. For nearly 7 years, Michael J.C. Fox lived a double life that had nothing to do with acting. Publicly, he was Mike Flaherty, fast-talking, endlessly charming, built entirely around quick wit and physical comedy. Privately, he was managing tremors, rigidity, and the slow erosion of the fine motor control an actor depends on every single day. And he made sure almost no one on set and almost no one in his extended circle ever found out. Here's how deep the secrecy actually went. He timed his medication around his shooting schedule with the precision of a stage manager, calculating exactly when a dose would kick in and exactly how long he had before his hands started to shake again. He held objects in his left hand during scenes to keep it still, a trick that looked like an acting choice and was, in reality, a survival tactic. And during parts of this period, he drank, more than he's ever been fully comfortable admitting. Using alcohol the way some people use denial to make an unbearable secret feel briefly bearable. He got sober in 1992, 1 year into hiding the diagnosis. He stayed sober ever since. But sobriety didn't make the secret easier to carry. It just meant he had to carry it clear-headed. Think about the scale of what he was hiding. Studio executives who built entire productions around his ability to perform 5 days a week. Castmates who worked beside him for years without knowing why he sometimes seemed tense, or tired, or strangely deliberate about how he held a coffee cup. Millions of viewers who had no idea the actor delivering their favorite lines was quietly fighting a disease with no cure, at an age when the disease itself was supposed to be almost impossible. And there were smaller costs, too. The kind that never made a headline, buttoning a shirt, signing an autograph, carrying a cup across a crowded room. Ordinary moments most people never think twice about became small, exhausting negotiations with a body that no longer automatically cooperated. He's talked since about the particular loneliness of that stretch, not the loneliness of being alone, because he was rarely physically alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people every single day and still carrying something none of them were allowed to see. Applause every week, a hit show, a growing family at home, and underneath all of it, a private countdown only he was aware of. By the late 1990s, the mask started slipping. Tabloids and paparazzi photographs began catching what Michael could no longer fully hide: a tremor here, a stiffness there. He had a choice. Let someone else break the story, or break it himself. He chose himself. In November 1998, in an interview with People magazine, Michael J. Fox confirmed publicly for the first time that he'd been living with Parkinson's disease for 7 years. And here's the part that should have ended his career and didn't. There was no scandal, no industry retreat, no fallout. Instead, the public did something almost no one expected. They leaned in. The revelation reframed everything people thought they knew about the actor who'd played Alex P. Keaton and Marty McFly. Years of quietly extraordinary performances delivered while secretly fighting his own body suddenly looked a lot less like comedy and a lot more like quiet heroism nobody had given him credit for. By 2000, the disease had progressed far enough that Michael made the decision to leave Spin City behind entirely. He didn't disappear, though. He did something almost no one saw coming. That same year, Michael founded the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, built around one audacious goal: funding the research that might one day cure the disease that had already quietly reshaped his entire adult life. Under his direction, it became the largest nonprofit funder of Parkinson's research on Earth, channeling more than $1 billion into studies and clinical trials over the following decades. He testified before Congress, sitting in front of lawmakers with his own tremors, fully visible for the first time on a national stage. A decision that turned what had once been a source of shame into a deliberate, unflinching argument for why the research funding mattered. Alongside his friend Christopher Reeve, he became one of the most visible advocates in America for expanding medical research funding, turning his own diagnosis into the foundation of the second half of his career. He kept acting too, just differently. Guest arcs on Boston Legal, Rescue Me, The Good Wife. A wry, self-aware cameo on Curb Your Enthusiasm that let him joke openly about a disease he'd once gone to extraordinary lengths to hide. Where he once used every trick available to mask his condition on camera, he later let it become part of the performance itself, an honesty about the body underneath the character that audiences had never seen from him before. He also started writing 3 memoirs, each one peeling back a deeper layer. Lucky Man in 2002, telling the story of the diagnosis and the years of secrecy. Always Looking Up in 2009, unpacking the optimism that got him through it. No Time Like the Future in 2020, the rawest of the three, written after a decade of worsening symptoms, finally allowing him to write openly about fear, about mortality, about what it actually costs to keep smiling in public for 30 years while your body quietly falls apart in private. In November 2022, the Academy handed him an honorary Oscar, the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award, recognizing not one performance but an entire body of advocacy. Then, in 2023, came the documentary that finally showed audiences what all of it actually looked like up close. Still, a Michael J. Fox movie, directed by Davis Guggenheim, used his own words and unflinching present-day footage to reveal, in a way Hollywood never had before, exactly what living with advanced Parkinson's really looks like for the man who'd spent decades trying to make it look like nothing at all. It won an Emmy, and it left audiences with an image of Michael they'd never fully seen. Not the invincible teenager behind the wheel of a DeLorean, but a 60-something man learning, quite literally, how to walk again. Viewers who'd grown up idolizing Marty McFly watched still and, for the first time, saw the actual physical cost behind decades of performances they'd taken for granted. It wasn't an easy watch, it wasn't supposed to be. But the documentary wasn't really the ending. What he says now, in the quietest, most recent interviews of his life, is the part that hits hardest. Today, at 64, Michael J. Fox lives with a version of Parkinson's disease that bears almost no resemblance to the barely noticeable twitch he first felt back in 1991. A benign tumor on his spinal cord required surgery in 2018, forcing him to relearn how to walk during a recovery that tested even his famously stubborn optimism. Falls have become a recurring danger, ones that have broken bones in his face, his arm, and elsewhere. Injuries most people might suffer once in an entire lifetime that Michael now describes almost matter-of-factly the way someone else might describe a bad cold. And here's the line that stopped people cold. He said plainly in recent interviews that he no longer expects to see a cure discovered in his own lifetime. Read that again. That sentence is coming from the man who built the largest Parkinson's research foundation on the planet, specifically to find one. It isn't despair when he says it, though. It's the same clear-eyed honesty that's defined nearly everything he's said publicly since 1998, a refusal to perform false hope for an audience that, by now, has earned the truth instead. What he hasn't lost is the marriage that's anchored him since 1988. Tracy Pollan has stood beside him through every surgery, every fall, every fracture, a partnership that has now quietly outlasted the vast majority of Hollywood marriages, built on the same steady, unglamorous devotion that first drew them together on a sitcom set nearly 40 years ago. Their 4 children, grown now, remain close, a source of the kind of daily joy Michael has said matters more to him now than any award or box office number ever could. He once put it more simply than any interviewer ever managed to. Family isn't an important thing. It's everything. A line that's followed him through 3 memoirs because it never stopped being true. He's talked more recently about the small rituals that get him through a hard day now, naming a handful of things he's grateful for before his feet even hit the floor in the morning, a practice that sounds almost too simple to matter until you remember whose morning it actually is. Some days that list is short. He says it out loud anyway. And this, finally, is the truth this video opened with. Not a single dramatic confession, something quieter, repeated in different words across several recent interviews. That he's made peace, as much as anyone reasonably could, with a disease that will very likely define the end of his life, the way it's already defined more than half of it. That the fear is real, and he no longer pretends otherwise. And that even so, gratitude has somehow remained the loudest voice in the room. It's the same complicated honesty that turned a scared 29-year-old hiding a diagnosis into one of the most trusted patient advocates in modern medicine. Michael J. Fox spent 7 years making sure the world never saw him struggle. He spent every year since making sure the world finally understood exactly what that struggle cost him and why, after everything, he still believes it was worth telling the truth. Do you remember the first time you saw Michael J. Shea? Fox on screen. Was it Marty McFly sprinting through 1955 trying to get his own parents to fall in love? Was it Alex P. Keaton, tie straight, ambition sharper than his years? Or did you meet him later, already older, already honest about everything the cameras were never allowed to see before? Whatever role first put him in your memory, the real performance was never scripted. It was 30 years of showing up anyway, of building something bigger than his own career, and of a diagnosis he never asked for, of finally, at 64, telling the truth out loud instead of hiding it behind a smile built for cameras. What do you think it actually takes to keep that kind of honesty going for 3 decades? Tell us in the comments below. And if these are the stories you want more of, the ones behind the spotlight, the truths that take decades to say out loud, hit subscribe. Because every legend is carrying a truth the world won't see until they're finally ready to tell it.